So can you briefly go over this again, like talk,
Oh yeah, okay.
if everyone could look at the chat, and if everybody could go to Discover Life, uh, and then from that, Sam, I'll let you take it away, and we're recording
Okay.
right now.
Just let me know when you want me to start. Are we ready?
Go for it.
Okay. Just a little bit of background. These Discover Life guides were created by John Pickering. He still maintains the website. He's got a number of mirrors. In the scheme of things, he set it up to be safe, even if he has a heart attack or run over by some cattle truck. There are people who can who know all the technical stuff and can at least keep it going until an alternative or it continues as is. So I've felt good about devoting tons of my resources into developing these guides. So the guides for those of you who just missed that, look in your chat session. There's two URLs from me. One is the guide I'm going to use as an example, which is Hylaeus females, which is the mast bees. And then there's a link to a place where there's a master list of the bee guides that we maintain up there. I'm going to go over the use of the guides a bit, and then I'm going to go over how to mess with the guides, and I'll be talking about how people can modify these or get involved or expand them to the West, which is sorely needed. And also how you can put in regional, very quickly, regional lists of species for whatever site you want. It doesn't really matter. So that's the big picture for today. So today I'm going to share, let's see, was there anything else I want to do before that? I think I'm just going to go right to sharing. If this is okay, Neil, I'm going to share my screen and then go from there.
That sounds great.
Okay. And all right, let's see here. Any initial questions before we start? Neil, if you see something in the chats, just I'm not going to be looking, but feel free to interrupt. Okay, so here's a guide. This is an example. I think we have maybe close to 100 guides, and we certainly have several thousand characters in among these guides. I could have started with the base guide for bees, which would be the guide to the genera, but I think it's more, you know, it's a smaller number of things to deal with one sex of Hylaeus in this case. We have 26 species. The guide calls them kinds because you don't have to be stuck with species. You can deal with color forms, license plates, it doesn't really matter. So in this case, it's 26 species of female Hylaeus. We've created a guide for that. All the guides are basically set up the same. Right-hand side are, can you see my cursor when it moves?
Yes.
Okay. So right-hand side has a series of questions or characters, and so a character would be head, clippius, color. The states of that character would be below that. And then on the left-hand side, there's a list of, in this case, species names. So they interact in a couple of different ways. First of all, let me also point out that all these names are associated with a species page that has taxonomy. Thank you, John Asher, and pick on creating that, the taxonomy part. And there's information in there from the literature, pictures. Here's the Discover Life mapping system in there. I can go, well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the maps. We can go back to that if we want. I'm going to focus on the guides. But there's a species page, and I'm constantly working with volunteers and other people to just put in taxonomic literature. You know, we'll just subset out, here's Mitchell's information about Hylaeus basilis or basilis. Here's information from Royce Snelling, which might have even been unpublished. And at the bottom is information extracted from Discover Life and certain data sets that have information about captures associated with a plant species. And you can, for example, on these plants, there's a plant, same thing, it's set up to be broad. So there's a plant page, it reverses that. You can see what species have been associated with that, that plant. Again, keeping in mind, just because you caught something on that plant doesn't mean there's a really specialized relationship with the pollen, which is what bees specialize on. You can see the records here that are associated. If you're interested, you can click on like this 12 and go through the records that come from the American Museum. And down here are the other records that you could also play around with. The idea is for us that these species pages provide information that would be helpful for the identification of this species, because many times with bees, you end up, as you guys know, with kind of like, well, it could be one of two or three. I don't like what I'm seeing in the keys. They sort of match parts of three. So it's a weight of evidence type of thing. You have pictures, you have maps, and we're always looking for more of this kind of information. I'm the only person here really full time, so we do what we can. Glad to, just throwing this out, glad to have anyone else adding information into the system, and I can show you how to do that. Okay, that's going to be the case for all these here, constantly updating it. What you're seeing is the most up-to-date version because there is no way to run this offline. It's an online key. The positives are you're using whatever we consider and modifications we've made to be the best key, and we're constantly tweaking the key. New species added, information incorrect or better worded gets updated, many times during the year for each thing. I can go back up here. Now I'm going to restart the key. So we're back again. We're off the species pages. You can use the back arrow too. But the most important thing here to think about is it's so very different from my dichotomous key. Dichotomous key, this is we would call this a matrix key. So a dichotomous key, couplets, and you have to make a decision. This one or that one, I follow that out. If it's ambiguous, you have to follow both out. You know the game. In this one, there is a presentation of what would be couplets. And many times you have multiple states. Instead of having two, you have multiples and they overlap. A species, for example, is often scored for more than one of these categories. You, the user, can decide that you have your own path through this. So you can say, I really don't like this Clypeus color character at all. I don't like using it for whatever reason. I'm going to jump down to one of these others. And on this first page, or like I know the subgenus, so I'm going to, click on one of the subgenera, and that's going to take me right down to just a few species in this guide. But a lot of people have no idea what the subgenera characteristics are, and they won't use them, and they will never use the subgenera character. So the last thing you want to do is guess, right? And that, because if you guess, then, and the species that you guessed wrong, you never get that species back. It's like the dichotomous key, but just because it's digital doesn't mean that you have to not pay attention. Okay, so what happens here? Here's a geographic area, and so this would be analogous to what you might want to do. Like I have a mountain range, I know the species of it, I want to create a guide for that mountain range for, in this case, the female Hylaeus. I just need a species list from you. And we will put that in here, and it becomes another thing that would be clicked on. We would probably give it a separate category, and it will just select those out. So for example, here you can see these green numbers. These green numbers are an indication of, for this character, which are state and province the bee was collected in, that for South Dakota, there are only 3 species in the guide. We happen to be working on South Dakota, so we know there's more, but right now there's 3. Tennessee, something that have done for years, has 14 species. A different thing here is you would think, okay, well, I can figure out the bees of Tennessee by going to each guide and clicking on this, and here are the bees of Tennessee. That is not the case. What you're looking at are the bees that could show up in Tennessee, whether they're known from Tennessee or not, right? Our objective here is that we create a conservative guide to what might be in your area, and versus a guide that is precisely coded that might go into a cladistic analysis of some kind or some other kind of geographic analysis. So this character here, Tennessee, says, we think that there's a possibility that 14 species could occur in Tennessee. Some are known, some probably are not known yet. And the idea is we want to not eliminate something that's potentially there, so we're going to be conservative about that. So here, so if we're in Tennessee, we have a specimen from Tennessee. I now have 14 species that could possibly be in there. Doesn't mean that there might be something from far away that weirdly shows up. If that we find that out, we will add that to the Tennessee list. Easy enough for us to do. So then we go down, okay, I, like the Clypeus color thing, I'm looking at my specimen, and so I have my little zoom thing over here. Can I get rid of that? Ah, there we go. So these last two character states, one says with creamy markings or inflections across the rim, otherwise dark. There's a picture of it. And this says with a yellow spot, otherwise dark. So I'm looking at this and like, it's kind of in between. So in a dichotomous world, you would choose one or the other. In this case, you just choose both, right? And you might be like, this mark is so vague. It could be dark, so I'm going to also choose the dark one. But it's definitely not these two, right? So you've eliminated these two, but you've kept everything else in a conservative way. Additionally, when we score these specimens, if we see a pattern where this dot is sometimes there and sometimes not, it'll get scored for this and this, right? Again, what we want is not the average bee has a small yellow mark on the edge of the Clypeus. We want to encompass most of the probable cases that you're going to confront, which might be both, because sometimes the this little yellow spot is tricky to see. So we'll mark it there, and then we'll resolve that species somewhere else if it's not resolved elsewhere. We don't want you to click on one or the other and drop your specimen out because sometimes it's ambiguous what it is. So we overscore. You should also overscore, because that's what our lingo is, the specimen if there's any question, because you can come back later and make another pass through and say, see what happens. So these search buttons are all the same. You just click them at any time, or you hit enter, and there's your list. And you can play around with this and say like, oh, well, what happens if I get rid of the dark? So you can play scenarios right away and like, oh, those are the 4 left. I'm going to keep this list in mind, but I'm still going to put this back in, right? And you go down, and I'm going to say entirely black, pronotal collar. And you can see this adds up to more than the original species number, because we've scored some of these for both. Sometimes they have the mark, sometimes they don't have the mark. I'm dropping down, though, the number of species that match the characters that I've given, and I'm going to go down here. Let's do this one with the red. I have no idea if any of them have that. One does. I have an answer right now, right? So just in case, I'm going to look at them, going to go to the species page, look at the map, see if it matches where I am in Tennessee, read about it a little, maybe, and see if there's any other characters, look at some pictures. But we could also go to black here, and let's drop this list down. I'm going to go to medium for the things. I'm down to 5. At any time, but somewhere around 6 or so is a good time. You'll see now I only have 2 more questions characters here to play with. But the reality is that there's a bunch more in this guide. We're just not throwing them all up on the front page so we don't kludge it up. So at some point, which is up to you, as when you do this, you can hit the simplify button. A new guide is created for just these species here, all right? And it brings up any characters that were on the front page that are useful in separating these out, still useful. And it brings up any hidden characters that are useful in separating this. And it does not show you anything that would not yield a potential separation in any of these groups. So it creates an entire new guide, but it brings up all these hidden, usually much more detailed, sometimes more nuanced and tricky types of questions. And then you would continue to go through. You can see here, the subgenus is still here, but now there's only 3 subgenera involved. And so the ones that were not appropriate, they're gone. So, and you see a lot of real detailed things like sparsus versus the others. The sparsus is unique. It has this front coxa with a spine on it. So you click on that and you are done. So that's the basic point. If you have species that are rare and maybe you only have the literature to go on, those can still be included, even if it means that some of these characters you have no information to score on. So in the case of Hylaeus, we have access to almost all the specimens, so this is not usually the case. But let's say that this particular character, the head antennal character in play here, you have one of these species, you were unable to score for this because you didn't have access to that specimen. What would happen is, no matter what you scored here, that species would stay in the guide because you have no information about it. It's simply going to retain there. It doesn't mean that it's scored for these, which is a nuance because it looks like, oh, it has a pedicel that is longer than first because it stayed. It simply means that some of these, and there's ways to tell whether that's the case or not, are in there because it was not scored for this. In most cases, all the species are scored for all the characters, but there are instances like that. And having a species for which you have only literature, you can include that in here too. So that's the basic use of the guide. And you can click things on. Once though you've hit simplify, these aren't in play anymore. You would have to restart the guide to use those, but whatever the live specimens are, you can click things on and click things off, and you can click on the characters and it brings up more information sometimes. You can click search back to get everything back again. So you can, play around with this to see, because you might have an hypothesis. Oh, I think it's annulatus, but I'm just gonna, click some of these things on and off and see if my confidence is increased by inspecting the characters, so to speak. So those are the guide basics. At any point, you also have at the top a list of jumps. These simply jump down to that character. When you have tons and tons of characters, this is sometimes useful. Usually people don't bother using that. You can, up here, you can decide to uncheck a box like, I don't need to use this guide. I know it's not sparsus, so I'm going to uncheck it and simplify again. And now I have a guide that just has those 3 species in it. So you don't have to eliminate it in the guide. You can eliminate it automatically, for example. You can, so I'm just refresh that so it stays there. You can, with whatever's in there, if these pop up, it means there's enough bandwidth or something. I can look at a map that has the 3 species plotted out on it, because a lot of times, you might be in an area where 2 of these species are clearly super common and one of these species is not. And you're like, well, all right, that makes me move towards the more common ones, or should. And if I'm getting it as the rare one, maybe I should spend more time looking at a full description. You can look at thumbnails of the three of the pictures, and you know, it will run down here, which includes the different sexes. So that's sometimes useful. You can go up here and compare images, which is similar, but the pictures are larger for the species. And yeah, so there's a number of avenues to hopefully what will increase your confidence about the specimen that you are going to use for your determination. So I think I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions about the guide use, and then I can show you a few things about how the guides are modified, and then we can go from there. Any particular questions? I'm not hearing any. So I'm going to go now and jump to the modifying guides. So at this top, if I hit restart, it just refreshes the whole guide. If I hit search, I get the original species back again. If I go up here, and you know, there's different bits of information like credits for who did the guide and contributed to it, sometimes not maintained super well. I can turn, if I have low bandwidth, I can turn all the images off. I can get a checklist that has the taxonomy for the these species listed out, and I think the synonyms are there on that checklist. I'm not sure why the checklist is not showing up right now. Usually it's pretty fast, but anyway, associated with this is a checklist of the species. Not sure why it's not showing. We'll restart the guide, try checklist again, still not showing. If I click on, I don't know what report means. It means send something to the author of the guide, I suppose. If I go to menu, oh, there's a checklist. So here's a checklist. If you want the synonyms, I believe you get them, if there are any. What would have synonyms? Aphanus would probably have a bunch of synonyms. Maybe not here. It used to have synonyms here. There's another way to go to John Asher's complete list to get synonyms. I'm not sure why they're not showing up here any longer. Maybe this is an error or something there for those synonyms. Okay, but back to this. I've clicked on menu. What comes up is a slightly different header here. If I have permissions worked out, I can click this get the PIN number, and in this case, it'll send to me or one of my other accounts and a few other people. It will send me a PIN number, and I've done this already. You can see what that looks like here in my email. I can get it to work. So here's from DiscoverLife. It had emailed me a PIN number. This PIN number is right here, and that's going to let me modify the guides after I put it in. And I've set that up already over somewhere. Here we go. Nope. Oh, did I overline? No, it should be here, and I've got to get to this. Yeah, okay, so here's the guide again, the highlights female guide. And if you look up here, I just want to check, is anyone out there? Am I still talking? I'm just talking.
You're doing great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'm just talking and I realize that everything has dropped off. Okay.
Right.
All right. You're enraptured. I get it. If we go back here, this damn screen thing off the top, on this URL, you'll see this is the female guide URL originally. now I've put in little codes. I forget what this is called.
Hey,
but
Sam.
Yeah.
I think you're just sharing one of your windows instead of what we see on your screen. So you'll have to reshare the screen.
Let me do that there. That's a good point. Okay. You are sharing screen. Got to get to the Zoom session screen, which, there we go. Oh no, that's not the, is that the right one? You are sharing the screen. How do I do this? He's peering at the, that says meeting controls. I'm probably seeing a session of a session somewhere. How about this one? Oops. How about, I'm going to stop sharing and restart in a different share mode. That, now I can see it again. All right, I'm going to go share screen and I'm going to show this, this one, I think. No, that is something odd. Okay, screen has stopped sharing again. Now, all right, well, we can do this the old-fashioned way. Okay, here is the PIN number. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to go to the highlights female. Oh, no, it's a, can you see this or not?
Nope.
No.
What is this, is what you're saying. Okay, all right, I see what I want to share. I'm in the Zoom session. I'm sharing a screen, and I want to go to, why does it, oh, this one. Okay, do you guys see the guide again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and at the top, do you see this URL that has now PIN numbers associated with it?
Yes.
All right, so now I've gotten myself straightened out. This part here is the original guide. Anyone can click on that and get to it. I've added some things that I've gotten from my email. I've gotten the PIN number. So here's my email. So I'm saying, and I'm using this email address, and then I'm using this PIN number. That's all that's needed to have access and permission to modify the guides. Now, when I click on the menu, I get an entirely more complex setup here. And I won't go through the tools, but it allows me to change anything I want. I can add species, I can subtract species, I can modify the words in here, I can add pictures, I can subtract pictures. In the case of what I know Neil was interested in, if I want to, I can add an entirely new character, which might say regional B, I don't know, let's say regional B locations. So it could be Rocky Mountain Biological Station bees, and I would then, if you clicked on that, instead of say clicking on Pennsylvania, you've clicked on Rocky Mountain Biological Station, it would eliminate all the bees that are not known from Rocky Mountain Biological Station, or whatever you put in there, which again, like us, it might be things that could show up at the Rocky Mountain Biological Station, or it could be things that are known from Rocky Mountain Biological Station, or it could be things that are common at Rocky Mountain Biological Station. So there's a variety of ways to play it. There's nothing else to do here when you're adding that list, because you're using all the other characters. You're just creating an additional state of a character to allow you to create a unique subset of these. However, this guide does not actually cover the Rocky Mountains. So that was a poor example in this particular case. If you're in the East and you say, I want to do, Black Rock State Park in New York, no problem, because we've got New York covered and everything, all the surrounding regions. It's just a matter of getting me a list and we can add that in. If you wanted to do Rocky Mountain Park, then we would have to add the species. I mean, you could add that in there, but it would be incomplete, right? Because there would be species not currently in the guide that would be at the biological station. And so it'd be very misleading. You could click on it, you would get essentially bees that are at Rocky Mountain Biological Station that also occur in the eastern United States. So a very incomplete list. I don't know why you would do that, but you could add in the other species, but then you would have to score them too, right? Because otherwise they would just be zombie species that would always show up and never resolve because there's no information other than the fact that they occur at Rocky Mountain Biological Station. So if you want to, you can add any species that you want, but you would then need to score those species in the guide for it to be useful. Does that make sense? So at this point, I can go through a lot of these details, like what these do, but I don't think that's useful in this particular case because none of you are like, okay, I'm ready to do it. I will, I've got everything set up. I'm going to, create, modify, or whatever the guide. So it really literally doesn't matter what these things do because you're not at this point ready to do that. But if you want to be ready, then I'll work with you and we're always interested in expanding these guides to the West. A few of them are expanded to the West, like Agapostemon, I think, for example, is throughout North America. They tend to be the easy groups, but Andrena is provisionally scored all the way to the West, but no one spent any time to resolve closely related pairs. In other words, someone spent the time to score the basic characters that were already in there, but what they didn't do is when it comes down to it, if we go here to the Has button, these are all the characters in this guide, this Hylaeus female guide. If this shows up, sometimes it takes a minute. And it looks like it's showing up, but not viewing for some reason. Let me try doing this over here again. Hylaeus email guide. You can see this in the Has button is available anywhere. And again, I can see that the characters are showing, but I'm not sure why it is not visible. I'll have to talk to Pick if this is some kind of generic problem. Let's go to a new page. And, oh, you can't see this now. Let me try. Menu has, and yeah, still have, for whatever reason, I had this happen the other day. There must be something that Pick needs to change. All right, let's go back to here. If we go back to restart, in the guide, if we go to search, and then if I simplify it, essentially all the characters are showing up. So here are all the characters. I'm not sure why the Has button is misbehaving, but you can see we get into a lot of details. Hylaeus georgicus floridanus Pictopes versus all others, facial fovea shape. So in the end, within these guides, you have a set of characters that everything gets scored for, but there are often doubles like Hylaeus hyalinatus and punctatus are really closely related. So we give you a lot of information on separating those two and separating them, in this case, from the other species groups. So to be useful, you will end up doing this kind of thing in the guides to make sure everything resolves. Are we still, no, not in there. So you can click the resolve button here. This is a tool that we use. And you can see even within this guide, based on a relatively simple algorithm, Aphanus doesn't have a one clear path to separate it from Modestus rebeckiae, schwartzii, and verticalis. And so there is some work here in the Hylaeus guide to work on Maciliae doesn't always resolve from verticalis. So most of the time it does, because it's just saying that there are certain combinations of characters that won't resolve these two. Anyway, it's a tool to look through and see if you need some more work on adding additional characters. So just because you, my basic point here is just because you scored your specimens for all the characters that are, what if I click has again? Still doesn't show up. Interesting. If I score it for everything, going back to all those things, then you can use some of these species, groups, and pairs need more information, like we have here, to resolve various super close together species. So there's a fair amount of work to come up with a guide that allows you to get to a individual species identification in most cases. So those are some of the tools for that kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I have a series of questions. They don't relate to the bees. They relate to taking the initiative of starting an entire new guide. I work on tropical fruit flies, and I've had a big interactive database online with photos, distributions, metadata, host records for hundreds of fruit flies. That database just vanished because it was hosted by someone who lost his job and turned off all the servers related to his work. So
that's horrible.
Yeah, so I'm seeing DiscoverLife as one candidate place to put back all that data and host it. So I have a series of questions related to that. First is, who would I contact to ask to start? I would do it by face. First, I would upload a catalog, the list of species with the synonyms and who described them, just like a world checklist. And over time, with a collaborator from USDA, we would start developing the keys to about 10% of the species, only to the pest species, because you're talking about 900 more plus species. So anyways, so who would I contact to get that started?
I think it would be a combination of myself and then John Pickering. So Pick, as he goes by, Pick is the person that gives people permission. So he'll go into Unix and set up a guide or a series of guides. Like there's a whole, like you're talking about. For something with 900 species, the question is, do you have one gargantuan guide, or do you have a guide to the genera, like we do for bees? We have a guide to the genera, and then we have individual guides. And if it's a big group, we'll split it into males and females. You might do something very differently. You could have a gargantuan guide, but it can get unwieldy, right, to deal with something that large in just one. I mean, you could. And then Pick has some tools that he's developed over the years. So for example, some people who are coming in just starting an entirely new guide, instead of modifying an existing one, rather than typing everything in or copying and pasting, which you can do into a blank, you can import an Excel spreadsheet, for example, that would do all the initial population as long as it fits the codes or the the format that he wants, and then you would go so you can modify things pretty quickly. So same thing with your list. he imports tons and tons of species lists, so that shouldn't be a problem. He just have to talk about formats and things like that. So, and then I would be more your contact with, like, how do I get the pictures in? How do I modify this? I'm having a problem with, some kind of workflow kind of thing. Because I do this all the time, and I'm easier to get in touch with sometimes than Pick, who's out working on his new big project called Shield, which you guys might run into at some point. So we just have to get Pick to give you space, get these initial things done, and then I would work with you in terms of getting going. And then at some point, you know everything I know.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I'll be consulting with my colleagues, and we'll come back to you a bit later. At least first, if we can upload a world catalog, world checklist, and the guide would be separate. That would be a guide only to part of the species, because cannot do everything. And the species pages, species profile pages, for that groups, you have a number of species listed with pages without any details that seems like they were populated using other sources, but doesn't seem to be any authors to these pages. Does that mean these pages, I would take control of them to add the information? Does it mean that it would be like Wikipedia, where someone disagrees will come and change the page, or I will be the exclusive person to modify? If someone suggests modifications, they go through the person in charge of the page. We just don't want to do a lot of work, then someone else,
someone erase it all.
Pseudo experts come and modify it and then include errors or.
No, so what would happen is, once you upload a checklist of species names, the framework for a species page is automatically created. There will be nothing in it. Once you create the guides that have the species names in them, or you have the species page done, then you can go in and modify that. The only way that someone else could go in or would go in is if there's some other group that wants to do, that particular fly group too, which seems unlikely. And then you guys would have to hash it out as to who does what. But essentially you would be in there, like I'm with the bees, so people could theoretically do species pages, but no one else does. There's a couple other people who've done their own guides to bees, but I'm the only one who modifies the species pages. So it would be similar to you.
Okay, so it's not like other people, not like Bug Guide, where someone will take a photo in the field and believe, oh, it looks like that one, and then upload and then add. Okay, that's
you would be the curator for those species pages, and so you would include or exclude whatever you wanted in there.
Okay,
and,
that's important.
When I talk about other people doing the species pages, they're working with me. I give them permission to add stuff. I tend to be very hands-off. It's like, if we can get anything in there that's even close to the original literature, I don't care if there's a lot of spelling mistakes or because of the OCR, I want to get information in there. So other people, are going to do it differently, but everyone is doing the species pages for bees is coming through me.
And so you've answered my whole bundle of questions, most of them. The last one would be, would there be, I assume there's tracking so that we find out how much our guides are used, how many people consult them or consult individual pages?
Well, Pick knows how to, I don't know the tool. Pick periodically says, like there have been 1.2 billion users of guides or whatever. So that can be done, and it's probably some kind of Unix code string that you could run too. But I'm not, I don't know what that is for.
Okay,
for bees.
okay.
It,
That's
it
okay.
can be extracted. I haven't done it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
I'll send you an email anyways but need to talk to my colleagues.
Yeah. And then we'll just have a chat with Pick sometime, you, me, and Pick, and
Yeah,
figure it out. And then we just have to harass him.
okay.
Any other questions? Things like that. We're I should
Hi,
say,
Sam,
we're
can you hear me?
gradually moving to the west. So I'm working with Mike Arduzer now on Midwestern, like South Dakota. And we're gradually adding those species, and then we're gradually adding the identifications and doing the, you know, the work to resolve the guides with new species. So for example, as we go to the west, we're adding, say, in Hylaeus, we'll add some more Hylaeus species. Well, those new species, some of those are going to be very closely related to the species that are already in the guide, and we will need to then go in and create new, how do I tell Aphanus from, say, some new Western species. So each species that comes in will have a ripple effect, and you have to just make sure that it's going to be resolvable under a variety of commonly used scenarios.
Hi, Sam. This is Becky Irwin. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you bet.
This is very interesting and helpful. Thank you. So, you know, as I've mentioned in an email, like we have a working key for the bees at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab.
Right.
So thank you for using that as an example. And you know, so like our key works for our bees, and you've kind of answered my question. Like my concern is like it's not going to be able to resolve differences like with Eastern bees. And so like, is that okay? And you'll do the work to make it resolvable, or like someone would just click on the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab at the top and then it would just pull those species, and you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So Becky, let me just jump in there and use you as a potential example. All right. So if I'm right, you guys have for Rocky Mountains some kind of guide, let's call it, for the common bees of the station. Is that right?
Yes, we can identify most stuff except the parasitic genera, and then the male Lasioglossum we can't do.
Right.
We can do the female.
So there's a couple ways that all this can happen. One is you could integrate into our existing guides, right? Add your species, and then we would, you know, have to work to, someone, meaning you probably, would go through and score the new species for the characters that we have there. And then, you know, you may want to add some characters like, oh, well, you know, these Western species have some features that don't occur in the Eastern ones. And so we never put that character up. And so that can be added. So we can add directly to this guide system. The alternative is if, for example, you have a set of bees that's a relatively short list, like let's say you're only studying 50 species are of concern to you guys, rather than, you know, probably the 1,000 that could occur in that area, then it might make more sense just to have a guide to Rocky Mountain that's a standalone one. You see, you would still have access to the species pages. I'm pointing at things that doesn't make sense. You would still have access to all these species pages. You would talk to me about if you want to add anything, because a lot of the Western species will have nothing in it. So it'd be great for you to add pictures. We would just coordinate that. But your guide would be, like here it says Hylaeus female, that's a standalone guide, right? It doesn't interact with other guides. It's not a subset of other guides. It's a guide to Hylaeus females for this region effectively. You could have a guide that's the guide to the common bees of Rocky Mountain Experiment Station, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Then you would have a list here of all the species, and then your own characters over here. And it doesn't interact with anything other than the species list and calls up maps and things and pictures. The guide itself just stands alone. You can do that too.
Okay, I'll have to think about it in that, yeah,
Mhm.
I'll circle back with you because there are still things I feel like we could resolve
Yep.
once
Well,
COVID goes away and we can get back.
how many species would you say are involved here?
About 200.
Okay. You know, we might just add that to the existing guide. So like 50% are probably already in the guides because a lot of stuff sneaks over to the west. And then the other 50%
Yeah,
have to be
yeah.
added. But see what would happen? So here, we would have all for Hylaeus. You have Hylaeus, I'm sure. And you would have for the female guide you'd have a checkbox here for Rocky Mountain Experiment Station. And it would include all the species over here and then whatever the new species you add, right? But someone else comes in and goes, okay, I could care less about Rocky Mountain. I'm in North Carolina. I click on North Carolina. All your species are gone, right? So it eliminates them from the list right away and doesn't mess up the functionality of the guide. So the Rocky Mountain one could be even just a list of species at the beginning. And then you would basically internally to the female guide here, you would be internally creating a guide for yourself, right? So initially it might not function really well because you didn't score anything for the Western species. And then, but you would have to then go in there and start scoring them, and you can do that on your own time, but you would not be messing up this guide. The only thing we need right away would be, I need a list of species to add to the guide. And then, I need a total list of species. Some of those were already in here. And then the new species, we would add them to the guide. And then we would add a checkbox over here, Rocky Mountain Biological Station species, and where you have a guide. It's not a great guide because if you have 5 species that are new to this list and they're not scored, they're not going to resolve, right? You'll always end up with at least 5. But you would have the responsibility, or someone, to come up with the characters. You would go in and go, okay, I've got a new species. Which of these characters does it match, and score them for them? And then you would do that for all the characters that it makes sense, Clypeus color and so forth here. And then you would go back and say, okay, that's great. Do we have any species pairs that I need to add a very detailed, you tell this species from that species, that aren't going to be resolved by very basic characters like, is it got red or not red in the abdomen? I can tell you our basic philosophy is we want to overscore for common characters and then end up with sets of very similar species and then go into lots of detail about that, right? We don't want to come up with a set of general characters that separate out everything, because you're going to end up making decisions like, well, on this Clypeus color, I'm going to score the new species for having this because it mostly has that, and I'm going to ignore the fact that sometimes you can't see it and sometimes you have this. Forcing the guide will work, but it's not useful because some of the practitioners are going to choose that color because they can't see this little tiny bit of yellow. There's a difference between scoring it and getting it to work and having a useful guide. A useful guide, the real test is, here's some specimens. I'm not going to tell you the name. Use the guide. We'll see if you get the answer right. If they don't get the answer right, where did they go wrong? Can you fix that? Are they just dumb? Well, that would be arrogant of us. But what is it? Why did you make that mistake? So it's easy to do, but very few people do it, right? The worst possible guide builders are often the experts, because in their mind, they already know all the answers, right? So the guide, I could point to several old timer bee people, and their keys are awful because it's basically notes to myself. And, like I have no idea whether it's 1/12 or 1/10 of the segment length, that kind of thing. So you want, when you're doing these guides, you want to have novices, or at least the people who you expect to use the guide, go through some unknowns, well, unknowns to them, and then see what happens. And if it doesn't come out right, you need to, modify something or fire them.
Okay, this is super helpful. Yeah, so like maybe what I should do for some specimens just as a start, like to go through, because we have these dichotomous keys we wrote,
Right.
but I should go through and score everything that's not in here for these characters.
Yeah, so a dichotomous key will, you can unspool a dichotomous key directly into this guide, right? But if you think about a dichotomous key, you're making a series you have a series of embedded questions, and as you get down to the bottom, the upper species weren't coded for those questions, but sometimes that's really useful too. So you will get a very parsimonious matrix key, but what you would end up wanting to do is taking each species, each of your new species, and coding it for every single one of the characters, despite how you had portrayed it in the dichotomous key, because the ideal here is a robust guide. I can't see the hind leg trochanter on this, Ceratina, because it's busted off or covered in glue. In a dichotomous world, you're screwed. But in this world, you can say, like, I'm not going to use that, but you want a guide that has multiple avenues to an answer, or takes you to a level that then you can look at, other information such as commonness and pictures, and, go back to hopefully your synoptic collection. So what I would suggest for you is to pick one genus, and let's just work on one genus, Halictus or something. And that only has a couple more, actually we might have done all the Halictus, but something where you're just adding a few new species, and it's something you use all the time and you're comfortable with that group, not like Sphecodes. And let's add that and see how that goes, and we'll just go maybe one at a time. But the alternative universe is that you just create your entire own guide, and you can take your existing dichotomous key and reverse engineer it immediately into that guide, if you wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know about that. I like your first idea better. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Okay.
Well, we're at the hour. I'm going to. Oh, can you unshare? I should be able to.
So there we go. I think I'm unshared.
So
hey,
quickly,
Neil, can you hear me?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, sorry. I just had a question in the chat. I know some people have to go, but just a quick question for Sam.
And I can actually answer that. So he said, Sam, that if you can't see the chat, that he's a crayfish. Oh, yeah. He's a crayfish guy. Can he use this to ID stuff? And my short answer would be yes.
For crayfish, are you talking about?
No, for bees. So can he, as a crayfish guy, go look through these? And I can just say what we've done at NAU. We'll get undergraduates and try them out on these guides and see what problems they have, and then move up the line. And but I would say, from our experience, they should work unless you have species that are not in your guides.
Yeah, so it would depend on geographic area. Eastern Mississippi should be able to do them all, although we, as Becky inferred, there are some nasty parasitic groups that, like Sphecodes, I'm still working with Mike Arduzer about what the heck they are. We have guides for them, but I'm not happy with them, just because it's ambiguous as to whether I have correctly identified specimens. So the best way to, like, if you're a crawfish guy and you want to get into it, the best thing is to take some known specimens, and I can send you known specimens because we don't keep a collection. I give them away. I can send you known specimens, and then you can go through the guides with a known specimen and see where you're, if you have problems. That's the best way to learn the characters, rather than taking a bunch of pro tem, which you don't know the answer, running them through the guides, but maybe misinterpreting some things or something, and then ending up with names. But, and this happens all the time with grad students in particular, you know, I use the guides, you know, but the assumption is that I use them correctly and that you got into our mind, which is incomplete too. Although we like feedback, like, I don't really understand this character. So my suggestion was yes, and start with known specimens before jumping completely into that pro tem or parallel.
Okay. Yeah, the big question I had was, you know, we have like the 100 drawers of this pro tem. It's all Hymenoptera, and my big question would be, how is there a key or something that I can separate the wasps from the bees?
We haven't put that together. It's actually it's a little bit tricky, so we have our workflow is, I have a bee, so you have to know that you have a bee or not, and then you go to the guide, to the genera guide, and then you go to the species guide, which might be a male and a female, or might be combined depending on the size. But no, we haven't done the wasp versus bee thing, just because there's lots of nooks and crannies in Apoidea in particular, and there's no really one great character. You know, if you look at the Hymenoptera of the world thing, it's not a great couplet or a set of couplets that separates out wasps from bees. You know, bees are just wasps that are vegetarians, really.
Okay, thanks.
I know that's not the answer you wanted, but
there are other ways to get around that. Everything from taking a picture of an individual one and seeing if iNaturalist can separate it.
I mean, I'm happy to do those picture things, like send me a picture and I should be able to tell you, like, no, that's a Tephiid or whatever. But some of the problems are the reverse, like some bees look like wasps. You know, some of the parasitic species are really close. I get dumped into my, so when we actually do our surveys, we have the volunteers pin up all the wasps and the bees because of that.
So we'll have to end it here, but I think, and I have a bunch of questions, but I'll touch base with you, Sam, after this. But I think the important thing is to have a follow-up webinar, like in late October, if you're available. And then maybe we could even, either Becky can do this for Rumble, we can do it for the San Francisco Peaks. Let's initiate an identification guide that somebody wants to pursue and see what some of the challenges are that we run into doing it.
Well, I like so the San Francisco Peaks is a little more tricky because you're way farther west. So a lot of those species are not going to be in the guides at all. So the onus would be on you to, you know, come up with the identification workflow. So the genera are all done. So theoretically, a genera for the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and North America are all separable. It then would be that species guides. So Becky is probably the best one to work with. And let's just maybe target a couple genera, add in the Rocky Mountain list. So we can add in a list at any time, right? And you would get at least a list of the bees of Rocky Mountain Experiment Station. Or San Francisco Peaks, but the guide might not work as a guide.
Well, we could even do something where if Becky wants to put Oliver's in, we can maybe put in a like one genus, Halictus, and see how that works.
Yeah. I think Halictus is done all throughout the West, though, but
so
I could be abused of that. And also, it's not super tested, right? We're using the Eastern guides all the time. So exceptions and other things, we work with people like Michael Orr and other folks in the Logan lab to expand these guides. But because we're not involved with the day-to-day, we may not be aware that, oh, this character doesn't really work, or it needs to be scored for more than one state, that kind of thing. So that would be useful. So Halictus, having people run through the Halictus of, I'm going to say it's done, theoretically, and then let's, you know, critique the guide to do New Mexico halictus species and see if there's any problems. And then we can just change it. We could do some of these modifications in real time, right? So both for Becky and for San Francisco, we could do halictus and then talk about like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. I didn't get into one aspect, which is we have standardized the characters to a great extent. There's a word, large segment to small segment. There's certain kinds of hyphens. There's certain things that we like to see and certain things that we avoid, so that people who are using the guides have a platform of understanding of the characters that they very quickly can skip through to find the one they want. So there's some, I tell you, having worked with a number of people to do guides, we spend a whole bunch of time up front that is only about the wording. Like I say, I don't even care. I don't want to see specimens initially. I say, just send me your characters. And then we go through that wording over and over and over again, multiple times.
Yes, you're leaving from home?
Pardon?
Oh, nothing. I think Luke was talking to somebody else.
Okay,
Okay.
sure.
But anyway, so we seriously,
All right.
I seriously have to get going.
Okay.
Luke, yeah, so if you actually.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here, and then maybe we have 2 more sessions that we have to do to really get through everything that we have to get through.
And if we go big, we can do the fruit flies. How did that look? How did that work? Where are we
Right.
with the fruit fly thing too? If that goes.
Yeah.
Well, next year we